So when the police get called to situations where people say, well, we should have social workers there, how often would a social worker actually be useful? And I think it's not very often.
In the wake of George Floyd, there was a lot of conversations about even using social workers to de-escalate situations instead of the police. I know Monique's got certain feelings about that, which she might share, but from her 20 years of working in social service, I'm wondering though, Mark, what do you think about that strategy? Do you think that there could be some situations where that strategy could be useful, or is that just not a good way to go?
Well, the term have somebody come in and de-escalate is vague. What are you de-escalating? The situations are very, very significantly. So if you have two people who are on the verge of punching each other out or getting in a knockdown, drag out fight, you don't want a social worker there. That's a danger. That's a hazard to that social worker. But if you just have two people who are not getting along and they, for some reason, think that the police are going to solve that problem, then a social worker would be okay. The bigger question is, what's the frequency? So when the police get called to situations where people say, well, we should have social workers there, how often would a social worker actually be useful? And I think it's not very often. And the reason is that police usually get called because one or both of the people want some kind of enforcement action taken. And when you want enforcement action taken, you're not going to call a social worker to have that done. So that's why the police get involved. It's nice to say, well, we would like to de-escalate this, but until you're there and you're actually watching it unfold, you really don't have a clue what you're talking about. And most of the people who say, well, we should de-escalate this and it shouldn't happen this way, well, show up at one of those scenes where people are screaming at each other and MFing you and telling you they're going to beat you or this and do that and so forth. And then say, oh, well, please just calm down. Please don't say that. It's not going to work. Those people are already beyond that threshold. So at that point, what the officers need to do is they're trained to do that, which is to calm people down, separate them, to minimize the degree to which they're trying to antagonize each other, and see if they can get some kind of resolution, at least temporarily, so that they're not hurting each other, already on the verge of hurting each other. It's at that point where the social worker can become very fruitful. But you don't want the social worker to be in there at first. So that you don't want to say, all right, look, we're going to send them to all of the calls where there are some kind of disputes. Bad news. That's a very, very bad policy. But if they are on call and an officer could get on the radio and say, hey, we could use somebody here to follow up on what we started. That, to me, makes sense. Whether there are enough social workers on the planet to do that is a good question, because there are more disputes than there are social workers to resolve them. But at least it's a tactic, it's a method of solving some of the problems. But just remember, you have to be realistic. People who are in these situations to begin with just don't handle life well. And a social worker working one time or even twice or three times isn't going to solve people's problems that were developed from their infancy or until they were, adolescents or adults. So it's a complicated problem, but it's not going to get solved by putting social workers in the place of police officers at first. And whether there's enough of them to do it in follow-up is an open question that society has to ask whether they want to spend that money and whether they think it's going to work.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree. I mean, there's already been a couple of social workers who have been killed going first. But I don't think that that's the role of the social worker. Like de-escalation techniques and all that, yes, those are a special skill set, but like you're saying, they have to be handled within the time of de-escalation. People don't understand that de-escalation is a window of time. Yeah. So if you decide, well, let me go in with my de-escalation, which is, to be fair, it is more than, hey, everybody calm down. It is more than that, but it still can't take the place of an officer who is armed and ready to be able to handle what de-escalation will never be able to handle. And there is a point where de-escalation techniques will not be able to handle some of the things that, a lot of the things actually that officers are facing. And so saying, we need to send in social workers first takes a lot of conversation. Mm-hmm. Each incident would need to be looked at individually. I don't know that we have the money or the manpower to be able to, or the time, like to be able to say, okay, is this a social worker conversation or is this a police conversation? I think about the officer, I want to say it was in Ohio, and he showed up on the scene, and there was a girl, and she was a Black girl, she was a teen, and she was literally in the lunge to stab another teen girl, and he shot her. And people were like, where was the social worker? Why didn't they send in the social worker for de-escalation? Who gonna de-escalate that? Don't send me. Like, sorry, let's just be honest. Don't send me, because at that point we're way beyond a conversation of de-escalation. We are now at a life-threatening moment, and social work is not meant to address that. That is something that an officer is meant for to protect and to serve, to protect the individual that is about to potentially have their life taken. But there's a lot of conflation going on, like, hey, well, the social worker can't handle that. The devil is a lie. The social worker cannot handle it, and not this one. You know what I mean? Like, we don't send people in for that. We have to be careful of what we're requesting and think about it in a more nuanced position than just, we don't want Black and brown bodies killed, so let's send in the social worker. Well, many times social workers are Black and brown bodies. And if they go into a situation where it's already hostile and people have already gone outside of their window of tolerance, what you're going to find is that whoever has the gun is going to be the one who comes out on top.
But do you think there's something, though, to Mark's point of, well, maybe the social worker doesn't go in first, but, on the back end, there might be some help there.
But I don't see that any different than what we already do.
What we're doing.
So
okay.
Let's say, something happens and people are arrested and there's domestic violence and all these things. There are social workers who then come in.
Okay.
Who then come in to assist children, to assist husbands or wives to be able to get things cleared up. You have, if there's like things that happen and courts are involved and all that, how do we mediate situations? How do we move forward? What are the counseling things that need to be involved? And so I'm like, I don't know, maybe Mark, maybe you disagree with me, but I kind of think that we already have a process that involves the social worker post an incident.